touchdown, Alabama, let's get it.
The process, no one can stop this. Hottest show in the streets, I bet you can't top this. Rammer, jammer, yellow hammer, come see how we rock this. Alabama fans the best, there's no way you can top this. Recruiting news and interviews, just sit back and watch this.
Recruiting news and interviews, just sit back and watch this.
The process.
A brand new week of The Process begins right now on Touchdown Alabama's YouTube page. As always, I am your host, Justin Smith, the scouting and recruiting analyst for Touchdown Alabama magazine. If you're not subscribed to our YouTube page, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Also, be sure to leave a like whether you are subscribed or not. I am here every Tuesday and Thursday evening to break down the latest in Tide football recruiting news. We have a lot to get to today with Tide adding on 2 new coaches recently. I'll break down what impact they could have on the Tide's recruiting efforts moving forward. I will touch on that, but the main focus of this show will be on the Tide's 2022 recruiting class, as they could be about to add some talent soon. So I will talk about a couple of guys who could commit to the Tide next in the 2022 recruiting class. But before I dive into all of that, I do have a couple of recruiting updates to roll out to you guys today to get the show started. As always, keep you guys updated on some of the latest rumblings when it comes to the Crimson Tide's recruiting efforts. So with that being said, let's get the process started. Let's dive right into these recruiting updates. I traveled to Orlando, Florida over the weekend to check out multiple Tide targets at the Pylon 707 tournament. I got a chance to catch up with recruits like 5-star athlete Sam McCall, who discussed the fact that the Crimson Tide have an updated plan for him at the next level. He also talked about his recent conversation with Nick Saban. You guys can check out that article over at touchdowналabama.com. I will discuss McCall a little later in the show. Another recruit who I caught up with was 4-star defensive back Markeith Williams out of Evans High School in Orlando. He discussed why the Tide was included in his top 3 along with Florida and Ohio State. He also discussed his relationship with Nick Saban. A 2023 wide receiver was also in action in Idarius Redmond. I got a chance to catch up with him and discuss his offer from the Tide in December. So be sure to check out all of that coverage over at touchdowналabama.com. Also saw a couple of recruits who do not hold Tide offers who may get an offer from Alabama in the future, including a 6'5" wide receiver in Jaden Gibson. I wrote an article on him today over at touchdowналabama.com. Be sure to check that out as well. Gibson also discussed what he likes and what he thinks about the Crimson Tide in that particular piece. Another guy who I caught up with recently was 4-star quarterback Tanner Bailey out of Gordo High School in Gordo, Alabama. He discussed Auburn and Alabama, which are 2 of his top schools at the moment. He has ties to both programs. He just talked about both programs going through coaching changes, so be sure to check out that article as well. Some of those pieces are subscriber-only articles, so be sure to pick up your subscription to touchdowналabama.com today. Another huge recruiting update that happened over the last couple of days was that 5-star running back Emmanuel Henderson out of Geneva County High School in Hartford, Alabama, announced his commitment that he will commit on March 13th. He's one of the Tide's top targets in the 2022 recruiting class. When you look at his top 10, he has the Tide included in there. They are expected to be a huge player leading up to that decision. I will talk about Henderson later in the show as well. To close out these recruiting updates, I want to discuss a top 8 released by 4-star defensive back Miles Rozier out of Belleville High School in Michigan. He is a teammate of the Tide's 5-star defensive tackle signee Damon Payne out of Michigan. When I talked to Rozier when he first got an offer from the Tide, he said he was excited. He spoke highly of the Crimson Tide, saying that they were the best, and it was by design. He had a lot of respect for the Crimson Tide when I talked to him when they offered him. So the Tide looks to be in the mix for another Michigan defensive player. This time it is a 4-star defensive back, one of the top safety prospects in the 2022 recruiting class in Miles Rozier. But now we are going to dive into a couple of prospects who could be calling the Tide's name in a couple of months. Today, I am going to highlight two 2022 prospects who could be verbally committing to the Tide next. And those two prospects are five-star athlete Sam McCall and five-star running back Emmanuel Henderson. Starting with Henderson, he is a product of Geneva County High School in Hartford, Alabama. He currently has a top 10 that is pretty impressive when you look at the schools included. When you look at Alabama, Auburn, Clemson, and Georgia being included in his top 10 at the moment. And going back to the earlier stages of his recruitment, this looked like an Auburn Alabama recruiting battle, an Iron Bowl recruiting battle, because when I highlighted Henderson before he had an offer from Auburn or Alabama, I just wanted to get a chance to interview him because he had a pretty impressive sophomore season, had more than 2,000 rushing yards, rushed for more than 40 touchdowns, and he had an insane highlight film, just jumped out on film with his breakaway speed in the open field. And he told me that Auburn was his dream school. Auburn was his dream offer. So I knew that the Auburn Tigers were going to be a huge player in his recruitment. Eventually, they offered him, and eventually Alabama offered as well. They got him on campus for one of their Junior Day events, I believe. And when they got him on campus, when I got a chance to interview him after that, he was saying he loved Alabama after he got a chance to visit, after he had continued to build a relationship with them. And he said the same thing after I interviewed him, after I saw him in action this past season, a performance where he rushed for 5 touchdowns against Arrington High School. Those highlights are available on our YouTube page, but he said he loved Alabama's coaching staff. He raved about his relationship with the Tide safeties coach, Charles Kelly, who has done an effective job on the recruiting trail for the Tide inside the state of Alabama during his time in Tuscaloosa. So I think the Tide is in a great position with Henderson leading up to his March 13th decision, especially when you consider the state of the Auburn football program, with them cleaning house after they fired Gus Malzahn. Other teams that I will pay attention to in the hunt for Emmanuel Henderson leading up to the decision is the Clemson Tigers, along with the Georgia Bulldogs. Those are two schools that I will pay attention to now that Auburn looks to have cleaned house, and their relationship with Henderson may have slipped, although I feel they are still in the mix. They could make up some ground, but I think Alabama may have a slight lead over the other schools at this point in this recruitment. But I will still look out for Clemson and Georgia when it comes to Henderson, who will announce his commitment, his verbal commitment, on March 13th. The next prospect I want to talk about is Sam McCall, the 5-star athlete out of Florida. I got a chance to catch up with him at the Pylon 707 tournament over the weekend, and he talked about a deep, in-depth, detailed conversation he had with Nick Saban recently. He told me that Saban talked about getting him on campus early in January as an early enrollee in the 2022 recruiting class, talked about signing him during the early signing period. Of course, also discussed him playing slot wide receiver. It was believed that he may play defensive back at the next level if he chooses Tuscaloosa in the past, but now it looks as if the Crimson Tide want him to play slot wide receiver. And he looked the part at that particular 707 event. He showed he was able to create separation. He showed his great athleticism off. He was able to pull down a couple of touchdowns. You guys can check out some of those highlights on our YouTube page as well. But looking at McCall's recruitment, you cannot count out the school he was once verbally committed to in the Florida Gators. But I think the Crimson Tide are in a great position with this Florida prospect at this point in his recruitment. When I asked him when he possibly could make a decision and announce another verbal commitment, he said it could come within the next 2 months. And when I asked him, would he release a top school list? Is he going to release another, because he had one in the past before he committed to Florida? He had a top school list which included Alabama, of course, but he said he may drop a top school list before he announced a commitment date, but he will announce the date 2 weeks before he announces that decision. So I think Tide fans should be on the lookout for that within the next month or so, give or take a couple of weeks. So be sure to look out for that if Sam McCall goes along with those plans. Of course, recruiting changes a lot. He may wait another 5 months to make a decision, but I think the Crimson Tide are in a great position, especially if he goes along with those plans and commit within the next 2 months or possibly earlier. So Sam McCall is a prospect I would definitely take a look at and definitely be on the watch for. Looking at what both guys bring to the table, Henderson is a 5-star running back for a reason. This is a kid who has experience catching the ball out of the backfield. As I said earlier, he has that breakaway speed in open space. Looking at Sam McCall, he's a very athletic kid with great instincts. He can easily be a defensive back at the next level. He has great size on him, and I think he is a prospect the Tide would love to have in this 2022 recruiting class because of the versatility that he will bring to the table. But switching gears here to the 2 new coaching hires the Tide made recently, including the hire of running back coach Robert Gillespie from North Carolina. Looking at what Gillespie has done on the recruiting trail in the past, he has been able to pull in some pretty impressive running back talent. Looking at Jalen Hurd when he signed with the University of Tennessee, Robert Gillespie was his recruiter. Also looking at Alvin Kamara, he was able to get him to Tennessee. Of course, he is having a pretty impressive career so far with the New Orleans Saints. He had a pretty impressive career with the Tennessee Volunteers as well. But when I look at the prospects that Gillespie was able to sign, has been able to sign throughout his career as a college coach, I see that those guys are scattered all around the country. We see some guys from Texas, we see some guys from North Carolina, we see some guys from Florida, and I think that's going to be huge for the Crimson Tide because you're going to get a relatively young coach at 41 years old who has ties to a couple of different states. I think that's going to help the Crimson Tide because you're going to get a guy who can recruit multiple states possibly. So I think Gillespie is a great hire for the Crimson Tide, along with what he would be able to help the Tide do on the field. The Tide also announced the hiring of their new offensive line coach, Doug Marrone, the former head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Tide will have 2 new coaches that were former NFL head coaches, which is something that is pretty interesting, something that's kind of crazy when you look at the Alabama Crimson Tide's coaching staff this upcoming season. But looking at Marrone, I think the thing that he's going to be able to pull from is what I said Bill O'Brien will be able to pull from, is that NFL experience. They are going to be able to sell that once they step into a recruit's home, if they get an opportunity to, with COVID-19 and the recruiting data period going on. But when they recruit these guys virtually or possibly visit them at their home, he is going to be able to sell the fact that he was a former NFL head coach. He has all of this NFL experience. He knows what it takes. And as I said about a couple of new coaches who come to Tuscaloosa, once you get the A on your chest, your recruiting game get something added to it. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see how he handles things on the recruiting trail. May have to shake off a little rust with him having so much NFL experience. But those are my thoughts about Doug Marrone and also Robert Gillespie. Also just want to hit you guys with the fact that the Tide may land 2 5-star recruits soon. That is just something to keep your eyes on as the 2022 recruiting class looks to get a start for the Crimson Tide. But first, they have to focus on finishing off their 2021 recruiting class with National Signing Day coming up in February. That will do it for this episode of The Process. Be sure to hit that subscribe button before you leave. Also, be sure to leave a like. Then head over to touchdownalabama.com. Pick up your subscription today. With that subscription, you will be able to read all of our subscriber-only articles. Get your hands on our yearly print magazine issue. Get a chance to read our in-depth scouting reports on each Tide committing each recruiting class. Also, get a chance to read our in-depth draft projections as well. Then head to the Google Play Store if you have an Android device, or to the Apple App Store if you have an Apple device, to download the Touchdown Alabama app so breaking news notifications can be sent to your mobile device. As always, I am Justin Smith, the scouting and recruiting analyst for Touchdown Alabama magazine.
Process.